Good morning, everyone. Welcome to week 17 of our Coffee Cloud Corner series. A few housekeeping items for you all. Everyone is going to be muted until the end. If you folks have a question, you can ask it at the end, or please use your chat box. And also, this webinar is going to be recorded. So for this week, I wanted to change it up and make this a vendor-agnostic Q&A session with one of our vendor seasoned engineers, Ed Dryer with Steadfast. The reason why I wanted to do this is because I recently sat down with Ed maybe last month, and I asked to pick his brain in preparation for a hybrid cloud panel discussion that I've asked to be on. Honestly, Ed blew my mind with his knowledge, so I asked him to repeat our lunch meeting and put it into this format for all of you. So a little bit about Ed before we get started. He is a senior technology strategist for Steadfast Networks. He has over 20 years of experience and has a background in server and network operations, information security, which is huge right now. And he's also a direct customer support in high pressure environments. So Ed will be your go-to when we have conference calls with your clients. He is customer facing, so he will be on the calls with your customers. Because of that, Ed has taken on a role comprised of, customer solution engineering, technical training, and serving as a customer advocate. So in other words, he is very, very smart. So today, Ed is going to discuss the pros and cons of Azure, the pros and cons of AWS, and the pros and cons of a managed hybrid cloud environment. And then we are going to get into some of those questions that we highlighted in your invite. We may go over time today. I promise we will, because I am positive that you guys are going to be in tune with what Ed is saying, because I was during our lunch. So with that, I will let Ed take it away.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jess, for having me. I'm really excited to be able to do this presentation and work further with Sandler and all its partners. I'll just give a little more details about me. I'm Ed Dryer. I'm the Senior Technology Strategist here at Steadfast Networks. I've been with Steadfast for about a year. Prior to being at Steadfast, I spent 7 years as the Director of Information Services for a Chicago nonprofit that was about $36 million in revenue with a $1 million a year IT budget. Prior to that, I spent 4 years at one of the largest law firms on the planet. I worked on their information security team and server ops groups, especially working with customers and the general counsel for data security reasons. So loosely said, I've got some experience as a customer, and now I've got a lot more experience as a vendor. Just to go on to the next slide, everyone here knows Jess. They know everything about her. She's fabulous and spectacular and brilliant. So if you guys don't know any details about her, you can read the slide. But to skip that, let's move directly into the talk about the different big cloud providers and what the different models are. There are a lot of things you can say about the cloud. It's one of my least favorite words, mainly because it can literally mean anything these days. So I hate when people say cloud, 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 cloud. But luckily, it's the business I'm in, so I have to deal with it. Let's talk first about Amazon AWS. And the short form is the 800-pound gorilla of the business. The reason why is they've been in business for about 8 years, but they have a massive capacity. Their last metric they did was they have 5 times the capacity as the next 14 providers of cloud-based services combined, meaning that they run the business. There are some positives and negatives to that. Some of the pros are, as we mentioned, they have that huge capacity. They've been in business for 8 years. They are extraordinarily strong in Linux. If you need to do a distributed Linux environment, AWS is kind of a dominant force, especially if you need to be in multiple data centers all over the world. On the opposite side of the coin, you have the cons. So Amazon being the 800-pound gorilla and being the giant force that they are, they don't focus a lot on the little people. They provide relatively little to no technical support at the server level. So although they're great at providing uptime and availability, when it comes to actually the individual care and feeding of machines on your environment, such as your Windows machines or Linux box, they fall a little bit short, and they work with managed providers. They do have a technical support plan, but it's what you'd expect from a company managing multiple billions of dollars a year. They don't really have a lot of time to focus on the small details. Another con is, because they're the largest provider, they're also the biggest target. And mainly because so many mega corporations run off of them, when they have outages, they're highly visible. everyone can talk about the time that Netflix stopped working for a couple days, or Reddit was completely down. Those when they experience outages, and they are getting rarer and rarer, they are massive outages, and they interrupt lots of lines of business. And one of their biggest, from a business perspective, and this works really well with talking to the C-level personnel for a con, is that they have a linear cost model. They go, what you see is what you get. You pay for the resources you use as you use them. They don't give discounts. They don't give breaks. They don't do volume. It is what it is. They open with their price, and that price goes up linearly the more you use, which for some companies is a feature, and for other companies is a bug. Moving on a little bit further, we've got the second biggest player that's coming into there, and Microsoft is really pushing hard to redefine the term cloud into Azure, is the Microsoft Azure environment. It's been up stably for several years now, and it's a strong environment for a lot of different high-level purposes. Pros are, it's backed by Microsoft. No one is unfamiliar with the name Microsoft. It has both good and bad connotations with it, but a lot of the good parts is their server operating system is solid. 365 has become a good product, and Microsoft is doing a really good job in kind of turning around that customer service model. Whereas AWS was strong in Linux environments because it was born of, obviously Azure, based off Microsoft Windows, is really strong in Windows environments. That's their main platform. They will support Linux somewhat, but for the most part, they're designed for large corporate scale Microsoft Windows-based environments, especially SQL and Exchange. One of the other big pros they have is they have what is called on-demand capacity. With Azure, you essentially select a program that you want with a certain amount of resources, and if you flow over them, Microsoft is more than happy to provide them for you at a charge. So they have, instead of that linear charging model, they have a floating scale. Which kind of dovetails right into cons. That on-demand capacity, which some companies legitimately need, becomes very expensive very quick. Microsoft's model is kind of like almost everything Microsoft does, which is you can have any color you want so long as it's black. If it fits in with their design, you're going to be fine. If you overflow, they'll compensate for that, but you're going to get charged for utilization at a much higher rate. Unlike AWS, Microsoft actually does have somewhat of a support model. They don't deep drill into like the patching and care and feeding of an individual's corporate environment, but they will provide very, very good technical support. However, it is expensive. You're talking about $500 to $1,000 per machine per month based on the last thing that I saw. So it's extraordinarily expensive, but it's very good. I've worked with Microsoft Azure and 365 support a lot over the past 5 years. They have their best engineers in the world on it. However, it's extraordinarily expensive. So it is built in such a way is that most customers are anticipated to do most of their own technical work. If you need a safety net, you have it in the form of Azure technical support. It's just going to cost you a lot. Their non-Microsoft operating system support is generally poor. There are some well-documented problems with certain versions of Ubuntu and other Linux where Azure just doesn't work right with it. And it lends itself to the same problems it has with Microsoft Hyper-V, which is the private cloud version of Azure. You can get your Linux servers up and running, but Azure is mostly built for an environment where your customers are mostly Windows and they have a Linux machine or two that are important, but they're not the mainstay of your environment. Let's move a little bit about managed hybrid cloud. Now, this isn't an advertising for Steadfast, but I like using the Steadfast logo whenever we talk about managed hybrid because, well, it's my company and they pay my bills. There are a lot of pros to it. For almost any managed hybrid cloud, wherever you go, you're going to have a fixed cost model. They're going to allocate you a specific number of resources, be it shares of a virtual machine, dedicated hardware itself, or dedicated clusters. The pros on that is you get a fixed cost. You pay a flat amount per month, and generally you don't flow over it. However, it requires some capacity planning. Additionally, you have broad technical support. Any hybrid cloud provider is going to have a team of experts kind of like me that are there to help with the onboard processing, the process, work with your project management to get your environment stood up, and then provide at least some core level of technical support, be it making sure your machines are patched, doing the care and feeding your SQL environment, and doing more of that hands-on white glove approach to technical support. And almost all managed cloud providers are also OS agnostic. Steadfast itself was born in Linux, but we've picked up Windows about 8 years ago, and we really run with it. We have strong resources on both sides. So do the other hybrid cloud providers. You look at it, Rackspace, SingleHop, they have experts that work on both ways. And frankly, most of us don't care which operating system goes on because we'd rather push to the server resources, which is good if you have a diverse environment. Cons for the managed hybrid cloud. Most hybrid cloud providers are smaller in grand scheme of things, aside from a Rackspace, than an AWS or Azure. They've got billions of dollars of resources floating behind them. So there's fewer total data centers. That affects a lot of super large enterprise customers, but generally doesn't affect the small, medium business. Being in only 1 or 2 data centers across the country is more than enough for a lot of people. So the price point is lower because you don't have the overhead on that. But if you need a really distributed environment, sometimes the managed hybrid cloud by itself isn't enough. Mostly also hybrid cloud providers do a la carte pricing for features beyond server hosting. What does that mean? Long story short, if you need a firewall, if you need specialized routing, if you need cross connects for your network, if you need distributed denial of service attack defense, all those things from any hybrid cloud provider are going to come a la carte. For some customers, that's a feature because most companies don't necessarily need all of them. But for some companies, especially the ones that do, it becomes a con. So it's one of those gray areas that go both ways. That is the bulk of the conversation about the different types of clouds, and I'd like to move directly into the question and answer portion so that we can keep on time. Jess?
Definitely. So if anyone has any questions, they can type them in the chat box. We have some questions that we want to go over, and then we can open up the line for the rest of those. So the main question that I often get from partners when their clients are, navigating whether they should do AWS or Azure, and it seems like the house is always divided, right? I mean, when I talk to end users, either they're all in with AWS, they're all in with Azure. So what are some of, the gotchas with companies like AWS and Azure? I mean, I've heard that it's kind of, it's really cheap and affordable with one solution, and then it ends up being very expensive at the end. So what are kind of those hidden, gotchas that maybe our partners need to know, so next time their customers come to them with this, they can be knowledgeable enough to say, well, maybe you don't want to look at that. Maybe you want to look at this, and vice versa.
Fantastic. So when you talk about the giga cloud providers, AWS and Azure, the number one thing you're going to see is that the price point during scoping and pitching is always going to be lower than your monthly bill. And the main reason for that is it's not a la carte pricing, but it's usage modeling. So if you are, as a company, don't have a very clear identification and metrics on how much processor power, memory, and disk space you're going to need, those prices are going to balloon really fast. And I've worked for 11 companies over my 22 years career, both in a consulting and a professional matter. No company is good at capacity planning. Even the largest enterprises overflow. So one of the things you're going to find is that initial cost that's listed on a piece of paper that you do financials off of, it doesn't hold up very long, especially because every company knows the next version of software is going to come out, and suddenly its resources are going to be quadruple of what they needed to be. Software companies continue to push products with more and more features, but that requires more resources on the back end. So the one gotcha you need to watch about is the fact that your invoice is going to increase if you don't have a fixed cost provider like a hybrid cloud. However, for small companies that are either very small or they do have a good understanding, sometimes AWS and Azure are a good fit for them because it can lower the price on the whole, but it doesn't give them a lot of room for growth.
Excellent. So when you speak to clients, and I often come across this as well, what do you say to a client when they come to you and say that they want Azure or AWS? Because, cloud, which you hate, I know the terminology, Azure and AWS are like Kleenex now. A lot of businesses think that that's all they have. So what can our partners say to their client when they come to our partners and say, oh, we want Azure? we want AWS, when we all know that Azure and AWS probably isn't the solution that they need. They just don't know any better because of all of the marketing.
Right. That's the way that we address it, and the way our sales team has worked on that is that when someone says they want AWS or Azure, that is the beginning of a dialogue. It goes down further to start those probing questions of what are you trying to accomplish. If they're just trying to host a file server or a print server or other things like that, usually they've been completely inundated with, the in-flight magazines the CFO reads are going to talk about the cloud in 3 paragraphs, and suddenly they're going to be sold on it. The fact of the matter is that when they're asking for AWS and Azure, 90% of the time they want some sort of cloud solution. So the trick on that is to engage the customer, have a conversation, and if need be, pivot, because in a lot of situations, those public cloud options aren't a good fit for their companies. To be fair, I've also engaged in a couple of deals here at Steadfast where we've had a customer come in where they're saying Azure or AWS, and we've pivoted them into a private cloud solution as a better fit for a compliance or functionality reason. But I've also had a number of deals where they've come to us saying they need a cloud, and we've pushed them towards Azure and AWS as a better fit for them. So it's mostly, it's how to be a better, I guess, the advocate for the customer, listening to what they need and having good resources to kind of distill down if they need the Giga Cloud, or if they need a hybrid cloud, or if they need a mix of the both.
So I actually love that example, and I didn't know that you were going to give that example. Why I love it is, you candidly said, listen, we have folks that we bring in and we'll put them on a private cloud, but we'll also put a customer on an Azure environment if we think that that is the best fit. And that just speaks to Steadfast's ability to be able to be agile in regards to what resource is best for customers. Because yes, you guys do resell Azure, but that just goes to show that when your customers come to you saying, we want Azure, we want AWS, we want a private environment, it definitely makes sense to get a vendor on the line, myself, Steadfast, whomever you work with, to have that conversation and ask those questions to see what they really, really need. So in that last example, you mentioned that, someone came to you wanting Azure and you said, a private cloud would probably be a better fit. So my question for you, because I often get this from our partners and customers, I know the answer to this, but I want to make sure that our partners know the answers to this. I thought the cloud is more expensive. I get that all the time from our partners. Wasn't it more expensive? So how do we address that when partners and customers come to us and say, well, I thought the cloud is more expensive?
This is the reason. This is one of the reasons I dislike the word cloud. It's all encompassing. It's like saying cars. There are different models of cars. You could have a perfectly functional Hyundai Sonata, or you could be driving a Bentley. They're all different. They get you from point A to point B. Cloud is not necessarily more or less expensive than anything. We have a lot of customers, because when you're talking about especially a customer that really knows their financials, cloud by itself is not more expensive than a capitalization schedule for hardware over 3 or 4 years, the software licensing, your Microsoft true-ups, all your other things like that. In the grand scheme of things, cloud's just another way of addressing a technical problem. And for a lot of companies, it's attractive because, especially those small, medium business, or even those small enterprises, they don't necessarily have the data centers in-house, the reliability by themselves to stay up and running in a modern environment, even in a minor disaster like a power outage or a flood. So cost, it's one of those things that people get in their brain that cloud is expensive. It's really not anymore. But the trick is you need to find someone who knows the shores, so to speak, and knows where the harbors are, and can actually do a needs assessment and a gap analysis with your customers to kind of figure that out.